Hello, beautiful souls. So, as of today, we are on lesson 66. My happiness and my function are one. For the longest time, I had this as my banner on Facebook, and it always resonates deeply with me, this thought, because it's truth. Our happiness and our function are one. So I'm going to read here what Jesus has for us for the lesson for today. You have surely noticed an emphasis throughout our recent lessons on the connection between fulfilling your function and achieving happiness. This is because you do not really see the connection. Yet there is more than just a connection between them. They are the same. Their forms are different, but their content is completely one. The ego does constant battle with the Holy Spirit on the fundamental question of what your function is. So does it do constant battle with the Holy Spirit about what your function is. It is not a two-way battle. The ego attacks, and the Holy Spirit does not respond. He knows what your function is. He knows that it is your happiness. So first and foremost, the voice in our mind that questions is the ego, because the ego is only questioning illusions. The Holy Spirit has no questions. The Holy Spirit is the answer. So when the ego is confusing us about what our function is, whether we think our function is anything else other than God's will, that is what ego tries to establish, that it is our function, that this world is our goal in some way, that this body is our goal in some way. But the Holy Spirit isn't going to battle that. The Holy Spirit isn't going to say, ego, that's not true. The Holy Spirit is silent. The Holy Spirit is still, because the Holy Spirit knows what your function is. So with these lessons, we're calling beyond the ego filter mind that's trying to ramble on with all these questions and confusions and uncertainty of what is and doubts, to the space, to the peace, where Holy Spirit reminds us that our function and our happiness are one, that God wills perfect happiness for us, and that is what we are here to claim for ourselves, because that is what has already been given us. So it's a beautiful thing. Today we will try to go past this wholly meaningless battle and arise at the truth about your function. We will not engage in ceaseless arguments about what it is. We will not become hopelessly involved in defining happiness and determining the means for achieving it. We will not indulge the ego by listening to its acts on truth. We will merely be glad that we can find out what truth is. So what's beautiful about this is we don't have to set all these false goals to what happiness might be. Happiness is not in the traveling. Happiness is not in the healthier body. Happiness is not in the perfect relationship. Happiness is not in having a better home or better things in this world. This is not happiness. Happiness is not having all your bills paid off. Happiness is not something that we can even question or contemplate, because happiness is the gift that is whole, that is given us by God to experience, and it never changes. It's a constant state of beingness. And so when we stop trying to engage in the questions of the ego and dillying in its doubts and certainty that God's will is perfect happiness, is when we can rest in a space of truth that reminds us what is true. Our longer practice period has as its purpose your acceptance of the fact that not only is there a very real connection between the function God gave you and your happiness, but they are actually identical. God gives you only happiness. God does not will sacrifice. God does not will sin. God does not will temptation or fear or separation of any kind. All of that is of the ego to make us think that that is the truth about ourselves and what we need to triumph over before we accept God's will of happiness. But that is not true. God has already given us this perfect happiness because He loves us as our sons. All we have to do is say yes. All we have to do is say yes. God gave you, God gives you only happiness. Therefore, the function He gave you must be happiness, even if it appears to be different. Today's exercises are an attempt to go beyond those differences in appearance and recognize a common content where truth exists, where it exists in truth. Begin the 10 to 15 minute practice periods by reviewing these thoughts. God gives me only happiness. He has given my function to me. Therefore, my function must be happiness. These are our 3 thoughts for today. Try to see the logic in this sequence. God gives me only happiness. He has given my function to me. Therefore, my function must be happiness. Even if you do not accept the conclusion, try to see the logic in this sequence. It is only if the first 2 thoughts are wrong that the conclusion could be false. Let us then think about the premises for a while as we are practicing. So we're thinking about also the content, the premise of the thought for today's lesson, to truly see that God gives us only happiness. If we think that God gives us anything other than happiness, then we're not believing in our true one united God. We are believing in a false representation of God. And therefore, we can see that that is also our function, to give happiness to our brothers like God has given happiness to us. And in giving the happiness to our brothers, we receive happiness upon ourselves in the recognition and seeing it alive in our brothers and sisters. So this is the golden rule that we're being inspired to embrace today. The first premise is that God gives you only happiness. This could be false, of course. But in order to be false, it is necessary to define God as something he is not. Exactly what I just said. Love cannot give evil, and what is not happiness is evil. God cannot give what he does not have, and he could not have what he is not. God is happiness, therefore he gives happiness, and it is whole. Unless God gives you only happiness, he must be evil. And it is this definition of which you are believing if you do not accept the first premise. So do we really think God is split? Or do we think God is whole? Do we think really God is only love and happiness? Or do we think God is split? It only goes 2 ways. The second premise is that God has given you your function. We have seen that there are only 2 parts of your mind. One is ruled by the ego and is made up of illusions. The other is the home of the Holy Spirit, where truth abides. There are no other guides but these to choose between, and no other outcomes possible as a result of your choice, but the fear which the ego always engenders and the love which the Holy Spirit always offers to replace it. So if we still feel fear in our definition of God, it is because it is coming from the ego. But if we feel that God is all-inclusive and wholly loving and loves us all equally, then it's coming from the Holy Spirit. So we must question our inner thoughts. We must question the way we are seeing our Father. Because as we do so, then we can open up to the truth that God wills only happiness for us and that God has given us our function. Thus, it must be that your function is established by God through his voice, or is made up by the ego, which you have made to replace him, which is true. Unless God gave your function to you, it must be the gift of the ego. Does the ego really have gifts to give, being itself an illusion, and offering only the illusion of gifts? Think about this during the longer practice period today. Think also about the many forms which the illusion of your function has taken in your mind, and the many ways in which you try to find salvation under the ego's guidance. Did you find it? Were you happy? Did they bring you peace? So as I paused for a second, today's lesson is brilliant in the understanding that we get to dive within our mind and see where we've been listening to the ego's guidance instead of the Holy Spirit. And we know we've been listening to the ego's guidance when we feel fear, when we feel doubt, when we think God is split, when we think that we have any other function but the one God gave us. And so in, recognizing what we still hold within our mind as untruth is when we get to truly question with reason. Did I find happiness in this guidance of the ego? Was I happy? Did it bring me peace? We need great honesty today. Remember the outcomes fairly, and consider also whether it was ever reasonable to accept happiness from anything the ego ever proposed. Know too that it's even like the ego proposes, okay, you want to have a healthy, fit body. So you work out, you lose 20 pounds, but you're still not happy enough. You still want to be thinner. You still want to be healthier. You still want to be prettier. And the reason this is so is because it's a false goal from the ego that will never be fulfilled. It is only to keep us in that perpetual seeking mode and never be happy. So you will find that any goal that the ego sets, it is torturous reaching that goal. And by the time that we get that goal, if we ever get that goal, we're still not happy. This is the contortion that the ego puts us in. This is the box that the ego puts us in. And it never offers us anything but upset. And this is what we're getting to see today. And yet the ego is the only alternative to the Holy Spirit's voice. You will listen to madness or hear the truth. Try to make this choice as you think about the premises on which our conclusion rests. We can share in this conclusion, but in no other, for God Himself shares it with us. Today's idea is another giant stride in the perception of the same as the same and the different as different. On one side stand all illusions. All truth stands on the other side. Let us try today to realize that only the truth is true. The way that this is shown to me in my mind at this moment is that the truth is true and that is laden within at the core of our beingness. And you will find that these miracle impulses rise from the subconscious mind. But because we have the power of choice, the power of free will, we can choose to inundate our subconscious mind with anything. And at first, by living in this world, the ego prompts us with all of these thoughts and beliefs and ideas and conclusions that are in alignment with fear and not truth. And then that becomes the basis, the filling of the subconscious mind with which we see and feel and think in this world. But once we start to dissect it and do lessons such as today and truly resurrect the thoughts that are in our mind that we've been hiding in our subconscious mind, is when we free up the space and we get to reach deep down into the subconscious where the miracles impulses reside, to allow those miracle impulses to come forward. And as those miracle impulses come forward, they rise to the conscious level for us to choose them, to see them, to experience that it is so. And it is these miracles that make us one in God, that remind us that we are one in God. It is these miracles that remind us of the truth that God wills perfect happiness for us. So this is why our function is forgiveness, to forgive our misperceptions and to literally uproot and unlock everything that is in our subconscious mind so that we can reach those miracle impulses, so that the miracles can truly transform our perception, so that we move from the wrong-minded thinking to the right-minded thinking, from the illusions to the truth. And once we reside in the truth and have these experiences of the truth, there is no going back. So that's kind of what we're doing today, uprooting all the junk that's standing in our way of having that miracle received in our mind to know the difference between truth and illusion, and to accept the truth. In the shorter practice periods, which would be most helpful today, if undertaken twice an hour, this form of the application is suggested. My happiness and my function are one because God has given me both. My happiness and function are one because God has given me both. It will not take more than a minute, and probably less, to repeat these words slowly and think about them a little as you say them. So today we have shorter practice periods twice an hour and also longer practice periods by sitting with the 3 thoughts that were given us earlier. So the 3 thoughts that we sit with for 10 to 15 minutes, God gives me only happiness. He has given my function to me. Therefore, my function must be happiness. Sit and contemplate this idea for 10 to 15 minutes and let the work of these thoughts uproot the subconscious mind to receive the miracle in your mind. And then, twice an hour if we can, this would be the thought that we can carry with us throughout the day. My happiness and my function are one because God has given me both. And so this can be applied twice an hour and let ourselves be reminded of the truth, because the truth is whole and it is absolutely complete, and happiness is our function, as it is what we are. So with that being said today, I love you beautiful souls and enjoy the lesson. Namaste.